Good evening. On behalf of Times NI, I extend a very warm welcome to all respected principals and dignitaries for the Times NI Principals webinar. I welcome Ms. Aditi Mehta, Head of Academics at Stones to Milestones, who has partnered with us for this webinar, and the chief guest for this evening, Mr. Anjum Rajabali, one of India's best-known screenwriters. Times NI has been a successful journey, a path that we have walked together. I take this opportunity to convey my heartfelt gratitude for supporting Times NI for the past 17 years. Your constant support year after year has made Times NI world's best students program. The theme for today's webinar is something that we will all relate to and want answers for. The 2021-22 learning gap and strategies to build it. I guess we will have a lot to discuss on this topic. Senior Assistant Editor and City Editor for Times NI, Ms. Sugandha Endulkar, will carry forward the panel discussion and introduction of the panelists, followed by a Q&A. Thank you once again for your patience. Please enjoy the webinar.
Good evening to one and all. It's a pleasure to be a part of this esteemed webinar. Welcome Anjum sir, welcome Aditi, Monica, and all my colleagues from the Times of India, and all you principals who have made this possible. Okay, in this time where each one is cooped up into their houses, hardly any live entertainment, edutainment, any food for thought, I think this webinar bridges all the gaps. And as the topic suggests, it is meant to bridge all kinds of gaps. The 2021-22 learning gap and strategies to bridge. Okay, here we have Anjum sir, Anjum Rajabali sir, who is a great screenwriter, head of screenwriting at the Whistling Woods, Aditi Mehta, head of academics freedom, the English OS. Now, in the midst of all of these people, what we are trying to do is find out some workable strategies to mold the young minds that you all are in touch with each day. So it's important for every one of us to possibly glean from the best in the industry. These are people whom we've invited here who have everything to do with life and education, who will bring to you a different worldview and possibly give you a glimpse into how to perhaps mold students better, also give you ideas to think, some points that will remain with you while you are out there dealing with them in such challenging times and through the medium of a digital or a laptop or a computer device, where everything has become so, like we say, virtual, unreal, but real at the same time. So welcome Anjum sir, first of all, and I would request you to share your thoughts with this august audience. Over to you, Anjum.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sugandha. Thank you, Monica. And thank you, all of you. I am not overstating my feelings at the moment if I say that this truly is a privilege, which is quite overwhelming. I mean, here I am going to be speaking with these stellar educators around for shaping young minds who have taken on the responsibility of literally guiding these entire generations of young people towards their future. I mean, this is something one can only be grateful for. So truly, it's a privilege and it's an honor, and I accept it with due humility. Being a teacher myself quite intensively over the last 16, 17 years or so, of course, in a professional field like screenwriting for cinema. But I don't think I have ever ceased to feel that thank you to my teachers, right from pre-primary all the way until my MA, when I was in college and university. That, I mean, the amount which I have learned, the inspiration which I still get, if I am about to stumble in some particular class, some teacher or the other, some memory or the other is invariably around to guide intuitively. But apart from learning in a formal way from all these wonderful teachers that I have been lucky enough to have, you know, they also say it's a cliche that life is a great teacher. But you know, there's a difficulty there, because life with all its randomness, its arbitrariness, its contradictions, many times it's very difficult to make sense out of life. And this is where, in my childhood, I discovered, fortunately very early on, that stories step in. Stories serve as a bridge from between us and life, because stories are like a repackaging, redesigning, reimagination of life, and presented to you in such a way that suddenly everything becomes meaningful. You get a sense of understanding. Life begins to make sense. And one of the earliest memories that I do have of stories, of course, like most Indians, is that of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. Even though I come from a Muslim family, but my grandmother used to revel in the most casual of ways while doing the most routine activity with us or while us helping us. Because I grew up with my grandmother a lot in Bombay. Parents were in the village. And she would keep giving references. And it is through those references to various incidents of the Ramayana, of the Mahabharata, that whole jigsaw puzzle began to get filled up. So it wasn't narrated to me in a linear way, cohesively at one point. It was through all these references that came in. But as it began to come in, there are, I think, two very important lessons which I learned from these stories, which I realize applies to most stories. Number one is that the way in which the stories were being told, it naturally raised questions in my mind. I mean, if you have a Duryodhan behaving in this extremely violent, envious, destructive, hateful way, it obviously raises a question to your mind, how can a person be so bad? And it is the answer which came from my grandmother, which actually encouraged my questioning, whatever motive or questioning impulse. She says, you are seeing it only from the point of view of the Pandavas. For a moment, if you really want that question to be answered, really, you need to get into Duryodhan's skin. Why don't we just pause for a moment? And I think she was cooking and she paused. She said, why don't we see it from his point of view? He's a child who was brought up to believe that he would be king. Those people had gone away, abdicating the throne. Okay, and he was brought up like that. He was the apple of everyone's eye. He's about 12 years old when they come back and suddenly begun to usurp his place. Then he is told he will no longer be the king. So you imagine how he is feeling, how displaced he is feeling from his point of view. They are the ones who are coming actually to barge in there. You may not agree with what he does, but try and understand his feelings. My first lesson in empathy. And that is what made me realize that there is always another point. If you do not question, you will never be able to reach there. And soon I was emboldened enough to ask the question, even about Ram, something which is generally never done. Because Ram, you accept as the divine incarnation, he's a god, and therefore you are not to question, you only have to accept. But my grandmother's telling of the story and the Duryodhan question made me question Ram also, that, okay, why is it that he abandoned his wife? I mean, a question which sticks in everyone's throat who reads it for the first time. Of course, there are profound explanations for that. But the point is, here she was humble enough to tell me that, listen, I don't know. It bothers me too, but there must be a reason. Mull over it. It took me something like 50 years eventually to be able to articulate a certain empathetic understanding of Ram. And anyway, I also teach mythology, so hence the reference came in. The point I was just trying to make through this very limited sort of memory that I was presenting is that stories helped me to also become a better student. Number one, by encouraging questioning, not accepting anything as a holy cow, which would, that anything is beyond question. That it encouraged me to do, in the confidence that there is always something to learn from questioning. And questioning is a good thing, something which unfortunately in India, we have, generally speaking, I'm sorry, discouraged. If you ask questions, you're a troublemaker. If you ask difficult questions, you are liable to be thrown out of the class because it is seen as defiance, rebelliousness, disobedience. And when I look at my son's teachers, I mean, he studies in Jamnabai now. I mean, he married late, so we have a child who was still in the 11th standard. A wonderful set of teachers. And they are constantly encouraging him to ask questions. And I felt that I should have been born now. So I would also get the benefit of that instead of constantly having to battle my fear and my tentativeness in asking questions. I nonetheless did, but there was always a certain apprehension. So I frankly feel I'm not one to advise anybody here, because these are people who should be in fact advising people like me. I'm a much less experienced teacher than all these principals are. But yes, if I have a little bit of experience, it is in storytelling. It is in my anchoring in literature, in mythology. And I do feel that today it is very important, and I hope we get to discuss this further, that we understand that the modern resonance of classics, the modern relevance of mythology, which is otherwise considered like 5,000 years old, and oh, it's an old story. It's not an old story. The setting may have been old, but what the questions and the dilemmas that you figure in those stories are so deeply relevant that they're embedded in human nature. They are the same feelings which afflict us today as you find in the stories, except that in the stories they're much more intense and magnified to be able to prove a point. So I do feel that it is important for us to encourage the inclusion of literature, books, stories, mythology into our education system. I think from a very young age, children should be exposed to this. It can only go towards enriching their imagination, which is the essence of where education actually comes from, because education is meant to, stimulate and in fact provoke your imagination so that you expand the vistas of your mind. And which better way than to tell them meaningful stories which make them want to reimagine life in more meaningful ways. Okay, so this is all that I would like to say to begin with. And I'm looking forward to a very stimulating and challenging discussion where even I get to learn something from the questions and comments of these principals here. So thank you once again, Monica and Sugandha, for inviting me here. It is a privilege.
Thank you very much, sir, for being a part of our principals webinar. I would now like to ask Aditi ma'am to join us. And very often it has been said that language comes secondary, maths and science is all that is very important. During your school years, you have mastered these two subjects. You have mastered everything you needed to know in life. So Aditi, tell us how this whole age-old thought process needs to be changed and why. Over to you, Aditi.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you so much, Sugandha. Anjum sir, a privilege to be with you, to listen to you and to share a virtual cup of coffee with you. Thank you so much, sir. What a beautiful question, Sugandha. And before I answer that, I'd like to just talk about one thing that struck me from what Anjum sir was saying, is how important community and inclusion are when we are growing up to form our views of the world. I grew up in a small city in Gujarat, and the only things my parents held valuable was reading. So every birthday, my mother gifted us a wall of the house. We never got things growing up, but my mother gifted us a wall of the house, and she would say, I have a younger sister, and she said, this is your wall of the year. You draw on it, you scribble on it, you write your own stories on it, and make things come alive. And every weekend our parents would get together and ask about what we have drawn, what the scribble means, and how we will enhance it. And that really got us thinking. That got us reading more. That got us going to libraries run by NGOs and the school library to figure out what else is out there and how we can enhance that imagination. So there was a reward for being imaginative in our household, which really, really got us a long way. And Sugandha, I really connected to the question that you have asked. At the end of the day, language and the ability for us to comprehend language and what it means is what drives us forward, right? When we talk about math, or when we talk about science, it's a lot of our principals here, we have over 80 of them, they will know that children do well in math in the younger years, grade 1, grade 2, problems are a lot more numeric. In grade 3, grade 4, when those numeric problems become word problems, when they actually have to imagine what it means and figure out, what Anjum and Aditi put together have 500 rupees, what that means. Is it addition or is it subtraction? To make that extension is where the ability to read and comprehend language at the right age really comes into play. You know, we are a culture that glorifies math and science and glorifies learning in math and science simply because, there is an uneven power distribution and an uneven weightage given on these subjects. While growing up, what children benefit from the most is 9 or 10 hours of language instruction a week, which can be reduced, say, after grade 4 or grade 5. But this phase, when they are just learning to make sense of the world and learning to ask questions and learning to be curious, that is when this time devoted to language and reading is so very crucial. And the only unfortunate thing about this is that this understanding comes to us a little late, because language as a skill is something that compounds over time. The way you absorb information today depends on how you have learned to read and absorb information as you were growing up, and how much importance was given to that particular skill set. And again, in the development of that skill set is where the whole community is also very important. Anjum sir, like you were saying, I grew up with a wonderful grandmother, who she would always ask me why I waste so much time in school when all the learning that I need to do is how to find my own water and how to grow my own food. And she was like, why do you spend so much hours and hours going to school, right? You just read and do things on your own. And so that was one voice. And the other voice was from my grandfather, a very erudite, very educated man, who spent his nose just buried in books all day long. And he would look up from those books to speak very rarely, but when he would speak, the world would stop to listen. And that was the power of, that the knowledge and the communication. And unfortunately, that realization comes to us late, but it can come in time if we are rewarded for doing the right things from the very beginning. As children, we are rewarded for having the right values. You're rewarded for saying the truth. You're rewarded for eating healthy food. You're rewarded for not beating up a classmate. But you're not really rewarded for reading. You're not rewarded for falling in love with language. And you're not you're rewarded for doing math homework on time. But if you're reading a storybook under the covers, it's more like, oh my god, stop wasting time. So for as a community, the purpose is that reading and language instruction should come back to the table. And Sugandha, Monica, I would love to talk to our principals about an initiative that we're coming up with for the next couple of minutes, if that's okay. And I would like to share my screen. I've been talking about the power of reading, the power of language, the power of community. And as an organization, I'm going to take a couple of minutes to talk to you about an initiative that we're coming up with, which is called Club 1BR. Club 1BR is very simply a community-based reading ecosystem. Elon Musk wants to send man on the moon, and we want to create a nation of 1 billion readers. That's what Club 1BR is. It is our effort to raise 1 billion readers. The how of it is very simple. It's through the support of an ecosystem that supports a child. An ecosystem that is composed of everyone in this room, which is educators, school leaders, teachers, and parents. The simple premise being that the more you read, the more points you get, and the more incentivized each and every stakeholder of this ecosystem is to read. The more you read, the more points you get. The more points you get, the higher your BR rank is as a school. And as a school, this BR rank is incredibly valuable currency. This is a currency that A, shows what you stand for as an organization and its intrinsic value. B, it's a currency that you can use for marketing and for attracting the best of talent. And C, it is a currency that you can use to upskill each and every teacher who's a part of the community. I think learning fast and upskilling is very crucial. we track reading, we track your children's reading, and this reading is tracked through an incredible mobile app called the Freedom app. If you see the spelling is very intentional. It is FREADOM, Freedom, where reading is the road to freedom. This app is 6 years old, and we have created it along with Stanford University's Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence Division, using the concept of good screen time. So every time a child opens the app, he's met with a story that is age appropriate, grade appropriate, and skill appropriate, all of them. The more stories a child reads, the reading is tracked. The more your school's child reads, your BR rank goes up. The more your teachers use the community, the more people learn from each other. And let me have you know that in the last week, we have spoken about this initiative to about 200 schools, and 199 of them joined on the very same day. The reason being, A, this caters to a need that exists, but nobody's doing anything about. It incentivizes reading through a community-based approach. And third, and the most important thing, it is free, like everything beautiful in life should be. So Club 1BR is a community to raise 1 billion readers. And I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to introduce it to principals who are here. This is an initiative for my organization, Stones to Milestones. You'll see the name here. We are 12 years old, and we've been doing this for over a decade. You know, we are here to stay, and this is a mission that matters to us. We are on this road. We are on the road to become a nation of readers and storytellers. And hopefully, you know, to ensure that every child who comes to our ecosystem can one day talk like Anjum sir and just, you know, just so beautifully convey the most essential and simple things of life. Thank you so much. Thanks, Sugandha.
Thank you so much, Aditi, for this absolutely insightful session. It was really wonderful listening to such different people, yet such common viewpoints, as well as the differences. You know I'm talking a lot in paradoxes here. There is difference, there's commonality, and this is what real life is all about. So Anjum sir, I would like to ask you, one of these, first question would be towards, do you think storytelling, like Aditi was telling us, is very important in schools? And if so, how does it help build analytical skills among students, would you say?
See, this is an outsider's view, and yet I will share it for whatever it is worth. I have never been too sure that analytical skills are some different subset or a different limited skill set which is separate from the other intellectual understanding or the intellectual capacities that you might have. I feel that it is possible if intellect as a whole develops. In any case, it should not be too difficult to adapt to analytical principles or to use those kind of, to further those objectives, that to adapt your intellectual skills towards this. So my point here is that if we're talking about the inclusion and the enhancement of the role of reading as well as stories and language, as Aditi very rightly pointed out, to a person, to a growing child, then I feel that there is an all-round intellectual development. And given that, why should it be so difficult for them to adapt it to any specific skill that they would like to do? Why only analytical? So this is my understanding, because also, sorry, Sugandha, just to add to that, what I mentioned earlier about the ability to not just think up questions, but to articulate them using language, as Aditi pointed out again, which is a good point. I mean, I had missed that. And so therefore, once you develop that thing, you are able to, through your questions, what does the question lead to? The question leads to an analysis, whether it's of a literary text or whether it's of a situation or a problem in life. What you're doing is that by asking the right questions, you are being pointed towards the answers which involve analyzing the situation. So I personally, I mean, I know it's a very lay sounding answer, but I am not equipped to, and I think I also sort of refuse to get drawn into treating the mind in very specific compartments rather than looking at it as an integrated whole.
Can I jump off this point? I'm
Yes.
so sorry, Sugandha. What Sir has said is so incredibly, intuitively important for me. And Sir, you know, this is the exact same mistake we make with language instruction. For a child, everything is divided in, okay, this is your grammar period, this is your language period, this is your literature period. And so the child forgets that what they learned about past tense in grammar period has also to be applied in a language period when they're talking about something. Or it makes the same sense when they're reading a story. And these divisions, these barriers we create with language education in the very beginning, right from the beginning, it kind of comes in the way as to how a child absorbs language. And that also comes in the way of analytical thinking. Just for the last year, Azim Premji Foundation did this incredible piece of research because of the pandemic related lockdown and children's schooling getting affected. So they surveyed about 1,400 children between the ages of 6 to 12. And they noticed that 92% of these children have lost one foundational language skill in this last year. And this loss is compounded by something that we don't give a lot of credence to, which is forgetting. So the loss is further compounded by the fact that a young first standard, second standard child has obviously forgotten what he learned in the last academic year. And this results in, you know, loss of abilities like, say, not being able to describe a picture that's put in front of you, not having the right sentences to say about it, or, you know, not being able to read familiar words that you used to read earlier as flashcards or as, you know, common words that you find on your classroom's word wall, or writing simple sentences based on a picture. And this is a massive loss. And this is a loss that leads to so much fragmentation in a child's mind, right? I mean, they don't have the language or the mental resources with which to undertake analytical activities as well, which is something that really stands out for all of us. And I'm sure the principals here will also feel that every time their teachers are taking an online class, it's mighty challenging. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Aditi. Aditi, I would like to ask you one question because you have been in the field of academics. Okay, here is a question which a principal is asking us, Anju Salaria is asking us. How do we stimulate interest during this health crisis as kids are sick of online classes apart from their health issues and so many problems related to anxiety in the social arena? Also, there are a lot of problems at home. They are cooped up, they can't go out to play and hang out with friends like they used to do earlier. And obviously there is tension in the family also, as grown-ups are also at home, you know, constantly watching over these kids, too much of involvement there. And virtual classes do lead to earache, eye strain. Now this principal has, you know, absolutely, I would say, put a finger on the wound. And Aditi, if you could please help her out.
It's a wonderful question. I would like to answer it for young children, say until the ages of 12 to 15. And then Anjum sir, given you are also a teacher, I'd love for you to take this in terms of how older children respond to online classes and how, you know. So for the younger ones, Anju ma'am, I think the answer is in, I would like to divide the answer in three buckets. So one bucket is very, very definite, purposeful instructional design. So when we teach something online, we would realize that we have to do double the preparation as we would have in a classroom. Because online, you have to engage with each child. We have to ensure that every child gets a chance to speak. And it may result in a lot of time lost. In a classroom, teachers have ways to make up for it. Online, we don't. So one recommendation is extremely purposeful instructional design. So your lesson planning has to be incredibly tight. There is no escaping that. The preparation that we as educators have to make has increased twofold. In your lesson plan, create spaces for purposeless play. When we do online classes as a part of Freedom and as a part of Club 1BR, we ensure that for every child, there are two things that happen in each class. One, a teacher says every child's name at least once in the class. And the children are not listening to their own names because their friends are not calling them anymore. So they love being recognized by an adult who's not a part of the familial ecosystem. B, build in spaces for mindfulness in the lesson plan. So there are 3 minutes or 4 minutes in every class that we dedicate to focus activities. You make the child close their eyes, you make them exercise, you make them move their bodies, you make them dance, you make them shout, you make them scream, you give them an outlet. The idea is that your class should become a place from where they take energy and not where they expend energy. The third point is balance the instructional design in a way that children have 60% of the voice and teachers have 40% of the voice, especially for young ones, because they learn more by expressing. One thing that's happening is that children, because they don't get a chance to express in live classes, they are scared of making mistakes. And then as a result, they don't ask questions. And as a result, they don't get interested in the classes. So have focus activities, build exercise regimes in the classroom, have extremely purposeful lesson plan designs, and shorten the length of online classes to maximum 40 to 45 minutes. Children who are younger cannot sit steady in one place for so long. And for the very little ones, children who are 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds, get mascots in your classes. Make puppets, get them in the class as reward mechanisms. So if everyone's on time today, yay, this elephant who is our mascot has come in the class and she's celebrating with all of us today because we've done a good job. So build in positive, build in reward mechanisms for positive behavior. And one last thing we do in our classes is we give points for kindness. So if you're kind to one another, if you listen when others are talking, if you raise your hand before speaking, if you help someone complete a thought when they're not able to, the whole class gets a kindness point. And every week, the kindness points are kind of tabulated and there's a reward. And I think children respond really positively to that.
Thank you so much, Aditi.
Sugandha, you want me to throw in a little bit of
Yes.
something here? A few
Yes.
sentences? Yeah. एक तो I was also struck as a parent by this question, that this issue and this anxiety which has been expressed by a teacher is not only faced by teachers, it's also faced by parents, because the child is there and you see the frustration in the child, they can't move around, there's so much time being spent on the screen. So I was thinking, in fact, now is the time to encourage some closer solidarity between set of teachers and parents. If there is more interaction between the two, if you build in regular meetings where suggestions and feedback is actually shared by the two sets of people who influence, two sets of adults, so to say, in the child's life, I mean, two significant sets, then I think there is a possibility that suggestions, creative ideas may emerge from this. See, let me take an extreme example now, moving ahead, because she said that also look at students who are older. Say somebody who's confined to bed, somebody who has unfortunately had a fracture. I'm talking about normal times also, or somebody who's ill for a long period of time and has to remain in bed. Now, obviously, there is enormous frustration in the child because he wants to move around, wants to sort of missing all the activities and friends and play and falling and all that. I'm saying, what is it that compensates here? Your imagination, your fantasies. And I think it is important for us that since there is an overload of learning, formal learning in children's lives, including in IB, I noticed, I mean, they're just completely full up with a curriculum which is so tight and so filled up that it doesn't leave much scope for just daydreaming, for fantasizing, for using your imagination. And I feel these exercises perhaps could be encouraged. It's just a suggestion, coming again from a storyteller's point of view, that if this is encouraged, it will not only, I mean, what is encouraged is that if they were to, for example, say, give language to their fantasies, okay, because you've been locked down, what is it that you'd rather be doing, say, on coming Sunday morning? Just describe it in the form of a page I'm saying a certain degree of cogency, perhaps a certain beauty of language begins to get discovered because they're actually imagining an experience and trying to put it into an expression. And I feel that, who knows, this actually might in some sense begin to give them not just a release, but a certain kind of much needed stimulation, which they are missing because of the lack of real interaction and really going to those places, whether it's the lakeside or the market or wherever else. I don't know, this is just a suggestion. I feel it may just be, might do something at least to this. And parents, I'm sure, are just very eager to not only weep on your shoulders, but offer you their shoulders also to weep on that. Yeah, we're both in the same thing. Our children are suffering. What do we do? And I'm sure stimulation and counter-stimulation will eventually come. Some creative breakthroughs would most certainly come. So this is speaking both as teacher and parent.
Wow. Thank you so much, sir. There's one question here, Aditi, I think, which is addressed to you. There is Murtaza Master who's asking us that in his school, they discourage social media and screen time for the young learners. Okay, and their vision has compelled them to provide books to students at home. So how do they fit in the 1BR program is what he's asking.
I will keep this short. I think if you explore the website, you will get to know a lot more. But in 2019, the situation was different. Now, every child has to use a device, and that device use is increasing because all the schoolwork is on these devices. So even if we find different ways to enable children to read, or even if we find different ways to give them schoolwork, children still find the device. And the struggle is to help children move towards good screen time instead of random screen time. When they know that they have, it's like there is a highway and you have to use it. What's the most optimum way for you to use this highway is the approach that I would take for answering this question. Also, what happens is when you join Club 1BR, there's a team from our side who calls you and explains everything that happens to you and your education ecosystem because of Club 1BR. And I think that is the best way forward here.
All right. Thank you so much, Aditi. We have a question here from Preeti Sharma, who is loving our session and who says, she doesn't know how to deal with burnout, teachers' burnout during these online classes because they're working from home, and the whole realm of professional and personal spaces has become rather blurred. So I do agree with Preeti's point of view. It's quite a challenge. So how do we come to terms? Aditi, Anjum sir, any insights on this?
Sir, please.
This is आपने तो मैडम दुखती रग पे उंगली रखती फिर से, क्योंकि हम भी टीचर हैं और घर से काम करते हैं. But yeah, see, मेरा तो ये है, because of course I think I'm much older than I imagine all of you here. So which is why perhaps I don't know whether this is unique to my age, but the I think ability to compartmentalize and your day, if this is the teaching time, the working time, then in which case I try to ensure that there is an insulation. Physical insulation is not terribly easy because you're sitting in the same space, but there is a spot there where once you sit, you imagine that to be your working space, and there is an invisible wall which seems to go up in my mind, where literally, I'm not joking and I'm not trying to sound over dramatic, that I cut out everything from the surroundings. I mean, my son is sitting in the other room doing his studies. My wife might be around here reading something or doing something, etc. It just gets cut off. And I find no other way of dealing with this, because you can't keep creating newer and newer spaces which you say, this is my formal space and this is my home space. Within that itself, I need to make that compartment. So that by and large has been working for me. And I think also it gives out a vibe where home people, etc., realize that no, he's not here. Because earlier I had to tell them that no, I'm not here. You realize I'm not here. I am at the institute. I am in my class teaching. So would you ask me a question then? Would you offer me a cup of coffee if I was not here? I wouldn't, right? You wouldn't. So therefore, treat it like that. Initially, I had to tell them, but eventually it seems to have worked to a certain extent there. And there is some other question which I can see here for me, but I'll wait for Sugandha to bring it up. Meanwhile, Aditi is going to answer about burnout.
I'm so deeply invested in this answer. I think burnout is a sign of stress, is a sign of depleting mental health, is a sign that your body and your creativity and your emotions, all of them need rest. And there's a certain part in us that needs to be recognized. And recognition has become increasingly difficult in a virtual world. So everyone is working doubly hard, but there are less chances for people to see how hard we are working, and this lack of being seen also adds to a lot of burnout. So there are certain practices that we do as an organization and we recommend to schools that I find useful. One is, make it a rule to take your weekends off. So we have a communications blackout. Nobody from the organization or will message you anything about work from 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. on weekdays, and absolutely not on weekends. We have to have a certain kind of boundary that we establish. We also have uh, another thing that we do is uh, we have spaces in the organization. In our organization, it is called a Sathi circle. It's a completely confidential space where anyone can come and talk to a senior mentor about what they're feeling and about how they're feeling, and also receive guidance on how to set boundaries. Like what you said, Anjum sir, is so true, right? Nobody would disturb me in a meeting, but in a virtual meeting, because you're physically sitting at home, there is a physical geographical boundary. There's no out of sight, out of mind. And just wait now, just tell me what subject you want to eat today, please, I'll go away in 1 minute. And those are the things that add to this feeling of burnout, right? So having a very honest and open conversation with family is something that I did personally very early on, and that has helped. I help them see what my work entails and why it's important for me to have some kind of an insular setting. And I think because everyone is going through it, understanding it is easier. And so take your time off, have your boundaries, uh, eat what, once in a while, eat food that makes you happy. I found food to be incredibly a very powerful tool. Reading is, again, just supremely important for dealing with burnout. It's the one place you will find a voice that resonates with you, and you will find what you're feeling written down by someone else, which adds to the feeling that you are not alone. So reading is obviously my last go-to answer for this.
Thank you, Aditi. Okay, Dr. Jyoti Nair, principal of New Horizons Scholars School, Thane, is asking us, there's a learning gap and it is creating an impact on goal setting, especially with higher grades. So how can teachers, educators motivate students to set goals despite this uncertain times? And also I would like to add to that question, with board exams being cancelled and a lot of announcements being made by the ministry and all of these people, that students can just pass from one grade to another without appearing for exams. So in that scenario, and in an online education scenario, it is quite challenging for students to set proper goals, for teachers to motivate them, parents to motivate them to study. So any insights on this?
This is again a painful question because, and let me share my view. I think something permanently has changed. I am not seeing this COVID pandemic as a passing phase. The virus and the illness and the disease and infection that it causes, yeah, that is a passing phase. That will eventually go when immunity comes in, and it's bound to happen. That history has proved that moreover it will go. but something has been reoriented, I feel. This challenge has made us also realize that perhaps we were in the process of narrowing our perspective of what we mean by normalcy, what we mean by normal life. And the knee-jerk reaction over the last year seems to be, to me, unfortunately, but it seems to be that we are striving to somewhere struggle to feel normal as we had defined it in these times. And that's not working, because we are measuring our experience, like even the teachers are complaining here, by what it used to be. So that is not what it is right now. And I feel it will be important for us to become more inventive, to broaden our perspective, to use more creative means to understand, therefore, what these goals should be, what the motivation should be. It is, I think, a great time for us to introspect and to share whether merely getting grades and therefore treating that as a sign of achievement or a sign of high learning is actually adequate or not. So at a time when people are having to across the board cancel board exams, which is like anathema, unthinkable in modern times. I mean, in normal times that, okay, 12th standard, but the determining episode of your future life is actually boom, it's gone, poof. Okay, and people are having to take some other means of trends and whatever else that they have done, mocks and whatever else they may have done earlier. I think once again, I'm saying that it is time for us to reevaluate how is it that possibly we can assess. If I were to tell you, okay, you cannot give exams, you cannot assign grades. Now tell me, how will you assess? How will I assess the worth and value of what the child has learned? And can that become by itself the need to express herself for the child, that becomes her examination? Okay. How can we devise means? I don't know. I don't have answers, but I do feel that perhaps we are desperately trying to cling on to something which I think has permanently altered. Okay. Apart from the working from home style, I was speaking with a person, a friend, very close friend of mine, who's a senior professor at Columbia University. I mean, he's regarded as one of the major intellectual forces of today. And he, a year ago, had predicted to me, he said, Anjum, something has definitely changed. Things are not going to go back to what it was. I said, what are you talking about? I mean, this is a phase which will come, which will go. I mean, come on, man. Okay, life is still waiting for us. He says, no, something will have changed. To watch. And slowly, we spoke. And sure enough, Columbia has actually declared that even after the pandemic is over, they are factoring in 50% of the teachers' time will be online, will be working from home. And 50% you will actually have physical classes, and they will try and work that out in a certain way. So something is already changing. Even people are beginning to discover that. My workshops, I'm beginning to discover that it's possible to communicate with a large number of people across the world instead of actually calling them here and putting them in a hall. So I don't know. I don't have an answer, but I'm merely trying to point towards something that can we open our minds to thinking alternatively, rather than going by the same formats and equations that we had earlier.
Thank you so much, Anjum sir, for that detailed answer. And it surely helps. A lot of teachers and principals build their thoughts and motivate students and teachers as well to do their best, especially in these difficult times. So there is one
Sugandha,
question. Yeah.
There is a gentleman here, Rasil Arun Khan, who said that more experiential learning and assessments based on that rather than on exams. And this person straight after our heart, man. Okay, I don't know which school he's from. I'd love to go and visit. But yeah, I mean, sort of jokes aside, it may be, I mean, can we at least think, I mean, you are the leaders, you are the intellectual leaders of education in this city and perhaps in this country too. Can we try and sort of reassess this? Maybe it's a time, maybe the iron is hot, the opportunity is there, let's just strike, okay? And let's remove this overemphasis on competitive exams. I mean, it also becomes the enemy of creativity because the fear of failure is then drummed in so deeply that constantly they are anxious about not being able to reach a certain space. So it is not merely do the best that you can, it is do the best, do better than others. that becomes their thing. Ambition becomes that, measure
Yeah.
becomes that. And I feel that is destructive. That is destructive to your creativity.
You're so right, sir. And the learning gap is not a COVID related phenomena only. The
Mm,
learning gap has been existing for us for years. Like,
mm,
our children are not performing at grade levels for language and mathematics and have not been doing so for a really, really long time.
mm,
So instead of looking at this as a learning gap that can get worsened, it is a learning breathing space where children may not have learned academically, but they have grown so much as people. Imagine 9-year-old, 10-year-olds telling their parents how to be safe, taking exams online, having learned an insane amount of new technology, parents having learned an insane amount of new technology. I may also go as far in saying that patriarchal structures have also broken because of this pandemic, right? Children are seeing parents dividing labor at home. They may have never seen one parent help in household chores. They may have never seen one parent kind of pick up the mop and try to clean the house. So all this learning that is happening now, it there is no way we can ignore it or put it out of our minds. So there is an academic learning gap, but this gap is not new. This gap has been there for a while, right? Study after study after study put out by NCF, of CBSE, by ICSE, by the NEP. Now we mention this gap, we know it exists, and we have been trying different ways to bridge it. Now what this pandemic has given us is an incredible pilot on how to bridge it. So we know, like you mentioned the Columbia example, hybrid is the way to go, right? Things happening as a combination of online and offline. So the work that we as educators have to do is help build this digital and training infrastructure that will bridge this gap a lot more faster. When children are now understanding what personalized learning really means, so they don't have to learn at the pace that the teacher decided or the pace that the classroom decided. They're learning on their own, and they're seeking information to help them on their own, which I think is a beautiful thing that's happening. And this is happening across all kinds of socioeconomic societies. People are learning how to use tech a little bit more. So I, you know, it- I love that so much learning has happened. Just because we think academic learning is a little less, the learning gap is not a learning gap; it's an academic learning gap. Incredible amount of learning has happened all through the year.
I
Thank
don't know.
you.
I was little mystified as to why you were being Aditi so circumspect about not mentioning the gender. Once you think one parent and one parent, it's the man. It's the man, Aditi.
I
Children have not seen their fathers participate in housework. Even if mother and father both work at the same office and mother might even be at a higher position, the important thing to notice is when they enter the front door, who goes to the kitchen and who goes to the living room. Okay, and clearly your gender roles become clear. So you're
and
right.
children are noticing that.
Yeah,
So children are asking
they're
us,
noticing that
they're
their
noticing that.
fathers, the male parent, is now being forced to participate in housework, which was ordinarily kept as a domain of
Yeah,
the mother, who
yeah,
could be exploited
yeah,
because of gender stereotyping.
yeah.
That is another story altogether.
Yeah,
Okay.
she
It's a
brought it
very
up.
interconnected
I'm
story,
only
Sugandha.
Yeah. All right. There is Principal Anita Dua, I believe, from the DPS School, Panvel, who's been using your program, Aditi 1BR. She wants to know what is new for preschoolers.
Anita ma'am, thank you so much. I've been missing coming to your school and meeting you. Thank you so much for joining us. So 1BR as a program is completely new from what we used to offer earlier. The community aspect is new. The staff room for teachers, the boardroom for principals, where everyone can learn and get together and share ideas. That is a very new phenomenon. There's a lot of learning opportunities for everyone in the ecosystem, and the 1BR rank is the newest thing about the offering from stones to milestones. So first we used to I remember we used to give certificates to children in your school who used to read really well, and now as a school it's all about collective effort. So the more the children read together, the more points we get, and the more points we get, the higher your club 1BR rank is. That is the fundamental difference. And Anita ma'am, someone from our team will give you a call about that.
Okay, there is Rajni Patil from the Dosti Foundation School, Thane, who wants to know, can assessments be done away totally, and can they focus only on teaching and learning? Because she feels that assessments are leading to unethical practices, which is infusing some sort of foul practices among children. Okay, what she possibly is not using here in direct terms, as Anjum sir always wants to put in very clear terms, is, yeah, students do copy, they do cheat in their exams because they are online, they keep the books open, or they take help from parents or other students. I have seen students also exchange answers over WhatsApp. So yeah, so in such a situation, what would be your viewpoint? Should
Oh,
they be
my viewpoint is absolutely been always unambiguously clear. I have always maintained, and I'm sorry to say this to people who are carrying the burden of this education system, that perhaps one of the biggest enemies of education is the education system. Yeah. Okay. If education means to aid a child in discovering herself, so that then she is able to see what is it that interests her, what is it that she likes, and education helps her to develop the aptitude towards that, so that she can go out and live as she is. Every single, the cornerstone of every single religion says, know thyself, know thyself. Yogis sit for lifetimes introspecting just to discover themselves. The education system was meant to be designed to aid this in a more formal, in a more collective way. Okay, allowing the individuality and originality of each child to remain protected. That is not what is happening. Exams, the way in which we use exams particularly, is this competitive grading which we do, which leads to all kinds of pressures and anxieties, and as a result of which, instead of depending on learning, they depend on copying and last-minute preparation. Anybody, according to me, and I know I'm being a little purist here and sounding a little brittle, but do hear me out. I'm saying if a child has to prepare for an exam at the last minute, in the last 2 weeks or last 1 month, that exam has failed. That exam has stopped serving its purpose, because exam is meant to measure what is it that you have learned in class through the year, and what is it therefore you know now. If you're going to cram at the last minute, then what the exam is measuring is your preparation. It's not measuring your learning, which you've done throughout the year, because that learning has to be assimilated and become part of you and your personality and your consciousness. And that is not what we're measuring at all. And then we're assigning grades, and then there's competitive grades, and then there's parents. One huge set of criminals are your parents, because they will throw this term of competition in your face every time by saying, no, bahar itna competition hai, ye university nahi milegi, job nahi milega. What are we doing? We are merely training our children to become some cog in some industrial or corporate machinery outside. We are training them for employment, rather than to live, rather than to discover themselves, to expand their consciousness and have rich lives. That is not what the education system is doing, and increasingly it is getting narrowed down. I'm sorry to say this, but even when IGCSE came, we said, okay, something new and fresh. IB came, we said, oh yeah, learning by inquiry, what a wonderful method. I'm not so sure that even those have not actually succumbed to that. There are tuition classes going on all over the place. Children's lives are just getting filled up, going from one class to the other class to this class, cramming things up, tests after tests. I don't know what we are doing. There's something very wrong which we are doing, Madam Patil, truly. And exams, I feel, is the culmination of all those wrong steps. So if something has to culminate in exams, I feel that something itself has to be questioned. So yeah, it would be a good starting point to imagine that what if there were no exams? Let's start. It sounds radical, but I think it's constructive, at least intellectually. Supposing there are no exams, you're forbidden from giving exams. Now what do you do? Now how do you deal with it? How do you ensure that you still assess a child by her or his individuality and originality? Okay, whatever it be. I mean, I mean, they say, a monkey and a crocodile. I mean, both of them are actually geniuses. But if you ask a crocodile to climb a tree, well, then you have a problem. You ask a monkey to swim in rapids, that's a problem. I don't know whether our education system actually seems to be somewhere by default, unthinkingly, inadvertently, and we are complicit in that, pointing towards that, actually. So yeah, I agree with you that let's at least think, let's start a discourse, a conversation on saying, what if there were no exams? What alternative means can we possibly think? I think the time has come. I think the virus is telling us, think alternative, because if you thought in the normal way, this is what happened. I will come back. So this is what I feel.
Okay, there is a question from Dr. Lipika Chandra, from the principal of Lokpuram Public School, Thane. She would like to understand how to have a creative discussion with children or teachers, and that would help balance teaching learning, and how would this hybrid kind of education system be implemented in schools after the pandemic.
Go, Aditi.
Thank you so much for your question, Dr. Lipika. Before I get to it, I just wanted to respond to what Anjum sir was saying about, imagining what if we had no exams. I went to a school where we had no exams until 7th grade, definitely. And the very first time we were given an exam, our teachers gave us the question papers and they said, "Ghar pe jao, go home and do this and come back. If you feel like cheating, that's fine. Let us know where you cheated." Right? It's like any test you'd give at school. It's slightly lengthier, but we want you to do it in a way and in a place where you're comfortable. So do it and come back and let us know. So we had a week of these exams where every day we were giving a different paper to take home. School went on as usual. We went home, we wrote the paper. I remember I'm a terrible speller when it comes to Gujarati, which is my mother tongue. And when I was writing in Gujarati, I made a lot of mistakes with my matras, and I used the dictionary, and I went and told my teacher that, hey, question 5, 6, 7, I had to cheat because I didn't know how to spell the word. And she cut my marks and she congratulated me for saying the truth. And that has stayed with me. The fact that you are rewarded for doing the right thing. And we have systems in our history where we have not examined people for anything. And we have done really well without exams. So like Anjum sir was saying, exams are a way of testing preparation and not learning. And if we just remove the burden of this word from our minds, I think we will intuitively have a lot of answers on how to gauge learning. And I think as teachers and as principals, we do it all the time. Like, how do you know the first set of exams that come to you in school are, say, 3 months after you've started a new grade, and you still before that exam know each and every child intimately? How do we know that? Because we are seeing them, and we're partners in their journey all the time. We have input from so many sources. We know, we talk to the parents, we know how they're in the class, so we already know. It's about kind of going back to that system and accessing the information. And to respond to Dr. Lipika's question, I'm just reading it once again, which is how to have a creative discussion on how the children and teachers would balance teaching, learning. I think the children need a voice in this discussion. That is most important. Children have learned a lot about how they like to learn, how they would like to be taught, and their voice matters. So, we have to have that representation. It's about forgetting stereotypes that we hold so dear. Like Anjum sir said, we hold the exam stereotype so dear and so close to our hearts that even thinking about it not being there is giving us some kind of shivers. Okay, how will we answer this question? How will a child go to college? There's a whole system that's dependent on it, right? So forgetting stereotypes and going back to the drawing board is always great. Be democratic, give voice to the child, give voice to teachers, and give voice to your own school ecosystem, right? Your parents as well.
Thank you, Aditi. There's Rashmi Singh from Podar Breo International School, who would like to know how do they counsel and guide parents to help children or collaborate with children in online learning, especially for the earlier grades, for the primary section. So any ideas on that front? Do children need parental intervention in online education? I think that is also a question here.
See, once again, here to take off from the word language. Rashmi ma'am, forgive me for responding in this particular way, but I do feel that it is not about telling parents, it's more also about asking them. Parents are also seized of the matter. Like Aditi said, to give voice to students, and it is true. I mean, and I speak from personal experience because I see my 17-year-old boy and his interaction with others, and then he tells us a lot. So he shares accounts of their discussions, particularly about teachers, about learning. And this is a complaint which they are beginning to now articulate. Perhaps the pandemic has made it sharper, that, you know, constantly being told rather than being asked. And even I think my wife and I mean, if teachers brought us in they used to call us for the meeting, for the PTA or whatever that meeting, and then they used to tell us. And I said, wait a minute, I mean, I think we have a view here. I mean, why don't you even assume that? You're not even factoring that into your consciousness. You feel we also have to be taught, they'll be taught. Hello, we are involved parties in the development of these children. And I think we observe them more closely. So I think it is very important for there to be an osmotic attitude that you have ideas, we have ideas, let's share them and let us see how best we can do that. Believe you me, they may come up with certain suggestions about how is it that they can, you know, not intervene, I would say, but yes, the job is facilitation. That is the job of the parents, to create an atmosphere, an encouraging atmosphere, to protect the child's space, to facilitate the child's learning. And they will come up with ideas. If they believe that they are being involved as decision makers in the child's educational experience, oh, believe you me, they would feel honored. I mean, I would feel honored, even though I'm a teacher myself. If actually his teacher said, listen, Mr. Rajavali, I want to have a word with you. What do you think? What else do you think we should be doing, you should be doing? Oh man, believe you me, I mean, I'd be full of ideas. So I think, yes, you are right. I would say, have your own proposals, my humble suggestion, but I think factor in the possibility that you might actually receive some wonderful ideas and thoughts from them about precisely what you're seeking.
That's a beautiful way that you have expressed your views on this. There is a very interesting comment with Rajesh Sawant has made. He's from New Era English High School and Junior College Bhiwandi. He's saying children run away after putting the thing on online classes on, and they just run away from the scene of action. They come back possibly to give attendance. I have seen students sleep off. Absolutely, the Kumbhakaran avatar. So how do they discipline children during a virtual class?
Oh man, once again, I'm sorry, Aditi, I'm just jumping in before you here. I'm sure you have more evolved views on this. Ek baat batao, Rajesh Saab. I have noticed increasingly, okay, amongst students of, I mean, I'm talking about professional courses, which means undergraduate we teach as well as postgraduate, both. The extent of mental disturbance is increasing at an exponential rate. 1 out of 5, so I know for sure, meaning they have confided in me, etc., are undergoing therapy. 1 out of 5, I'm talking about. Okay, and in the undergraduate, they're just out of 12 standards, so just a year before this, they were in your hands. Okay. And the pandemic is also causing a certain kind of disorientation and pressure. Believe you me, it's traumatic for them. We will have to learn to create space for that. We will also have to factor in some amount of goofing off, like you're saying, they run out to play, etc. Factor that in and ensure that we either reduce the number of classes or we take more time to cover a particular subject so that children have a chance to catch up, those who have goofed off or missed it or just weren't able to pay attention, they are able to get re-included into the stream that you are carrying forward. So I do feel that it is very important now to reassess that. If you ask me for an ideal situation, sir, I would say that in this country, the ratio of teachers to students has to improve drastically. Okay. The load on teachers has to reduce drastically. Yeah. More teachers, you have to be paid better. There has to be a certain option for you to expand your minds by either putting in grants for further learning, further retraining yourself, for a certain degree of travel. We need to expand the way teachers receive their nourishment, and we need to increase the number of students, the number of teachers per student, and we need to reduce classroom time. I feel it is very important to do that. This is all very ideal. The government refuses to allocate any more budget to this. They should be putting in minimum basics for all teachers. Okay, everybody will be paid beyond this. You come in there, let the government come in and give grants, etc. खैर ये सब आइडियल बातें हैं, ये हो नहीं रहा है, पर अपने अंदर जितनी भी अपने आइलैंड पे हमारे पास ऑटोनॉमी जो भी जितनी भी है, I feel it is important for us to try during the pandemic to reduce, even in terms of time and in terms of quantum, the burden which is there on these kids. It's really, really unfair when you see it from their point of view. Seriously, and it's causing serious issues. It's causing serious issues.
You're right, sir. And I think one thing we need to start doing from a very young age is normalize talking about feelings. We are very we don't know how to have conversations about feelings. It's always considered to be something that abhi iska time nahi hai. Let's talk about it when there is a little bit of time. Right now, let's focus on what you have to learn, without realizing that it becomes a barrier to what you can absorb if what's happening inside you is not felt or processed fully. So talking about feelings, we have to normalize it in our digital classrooms and in our in-person classrooms whenever we may go back to them. And teachers need to be empowered to talk about feelings, because it's not like we know how to do it really well ourselves. So it has to be a community learning approach that drives it. I know that the people who care the most about the child with the best of intentions are always the teachers. And when this community comes together, the solutions that we'll have will be outstanding. So, problems like children running away from screen would be things that we celebrate, just because it's an opportunity for us to learn how can we make learning more engaging and more exciting for all kinds of children. And children will find a way to have fun, right? They're kids. That's what they're there for. If you don't run away in the middle of a class when you're young, and I would worry, honestly, right? That's what you're there to play. Your playfulness has to come alive. But if children experience safe spaces where they feel they can talk about what's happening inside of them without judgment, then I think we'll resolve this problem for life, because we will have created a pull. Why this conversation is so beautiful is because Anjum sir is, you're not only able to understand what everyone is saying intellectually, but you're able to empathize with it and then put it back into words in a way that is comforting for a lot of us. And it makes us feel like we're all together in this, right? So the community piece comes super alive. Empathy is very, very visible. And talking about feelings is very normal. Like we're all devastated about what's happening outside. And yet we are giving our best day in and day out, just because that 9-year-old should feel like today somebody cared about me. Today my teacher said my name in my class and she said, oh wow, look at you, your essay writing has become so much better. Or look at you, wow, you're doing algebra already. This is only something that comes in 5th grade. We are appreciating children's individual journeys. And I think normalizing talking about feelings is the first step for this. And we as educators, we have to let go of some of our older notions of what power is and be fine if children run amok. Parents will partner with you if you ask them. We have asked parents to partner with us, and because everyone wants to safeguard our children, everyone will just come together. So I think, it's not something that we have to worry about so much. There is a deeper underlying problem that we have to talk about a lot more.
Well, thank you so much for these answers. There is Anuradha Sinha who has an interesting question here. She's saying that it's difficult to motivate parents or make them understand that students are learning despite the online education platform. Also, in their virtual classes, teachers are putting in their best efforts and students are learning. Parents are not satisfied with that. She is from Manav Mandir High School.
Um, I think I've seen this happening over the last 2 years, and this has been exacerbated by the pandemic. Is parents and teachers are, instead of being on the same side of the table, are gradually coming on opposite sides of the table, where the conversation is about you did this or you did not do this, and not about how can we work together to ensure that Aditi, who does not get quadratic equations, gets it a little bit better. So I'm worried about this conversation, honestly. So, that's the first thing I wanted to share. Uh, I think children make learning visible in excellent ways. Uh, so, for a parent, what's visible is a child's confidence or articulation or ability to solve problems a lot more creatively, but not sums in a notebook. But what a parent is trained to look for is only sums in a notebook. So they are not appreciating of the growth that the child is showing in terms of being eloquent, in terms of being articulate, in terms of being confident, in terms of solving problems, in terms of being creative. So they can see, oh, YouTube पे बहुत time waste करता है, Dream11 पे team बनाता है, और notebook में तो कुछ करता नहीं है, right? But we have to also gradually educate parents what to look for. And Anjum sir, your views may be the same here. My parents took my teacher's words as Satyavachan always. If Aditi's teacher has said this, there has to be an element of truth in it. Let me explore it a little bit more. So if our teachers are able to guide our parents to really see where the learning is happening, because you are driving that learning. So, it's about a better conversation with the parents is what I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I would sort of by and large agree, though I do share the concern that has been expressed here. And I can imagine, okay, how ma'am is feeling, Anuradha ma'am. But I am afraid, I mean, yeah, some parents are fixed about, where achievement is measured by some particular milestones which they have in mind. And unless you fulfill that, aisa kaise ho sakta hai? I am sorry, but I mean, these are difficult parents and you have all my sympathy here, being both teacher and parent. But you have to encourage a conversation with them. And if they feel that they are being heard and their anxiety is being understood, I suspect that is half the thing gone. They may not be valid about what is it that they are expressing, but what is the feeling from which it is arising, that I think one can sympathize with them, rather one can empathize with that. We understand that. उतना भी अगर उनको पता चले ना, believe you me, बड़ा reassurance आ जाता है, क्योंकि you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, I completely understand that, and I've factored that into it, and I will think about it. I will reflect on it. Half of them easily will go away satisfied. Yeah, okay, fine. I have passed on my concern to the teacher. She is aware of what I am feeling, and she will think. Uske baad, I think some kind of involvement, and as I said, maybe a little bit of osmosis, if it takes place, they feel that they are involved, they will feel more responsible, they will feel more sensitized to the difficulties that you people are facing, because they become confidants of yours. So Aditi put it in a rather sort of choreographed way. It's, I think, necessary to bring them to this side of the table. But they should feel that you are going to their side of the table.
Yeah.
Okay, हाँ नहीं, तो टीचर समझती है मेरे को, सुनती है. एक तो ये अनुराधा मैम ये सुनते हैं ना, ये अगर ह्यूमन बीइंग को एक आश्वासन आए कि मेरी बात सुन रहा है, सुनिंग not only just hearing but you're listening clearly or whatever, you're not listening but hearing it. You hear what I am saying, boss, they will become your best friends. So give it a shot. I speak from this side.
Yeah, absolutely true.
Well, I think we have, touched upon all the aspects of virtual learning that were there in such a short time span. It was a vast topic. Thank you so much, Anjum sir. Thank you, Aditi, for giving and sharing your wonderful insights with educators, for listening to their questions, answering their questions without favor or bias.
We have to congratulate our attendees for listening, because they have been listening to us with rapt attention. And I mean, it is something for 100 people to come together in a room and for 90 minutes really take things in and contribute to a conversation. So I'm really celebrating that. Attention nowadays is a gift, and may we be worthy of that gift all the time.
Truly. And once again, from my side, also deep sense of gratitude, Monica, Sugandha, and the entire team which has organized this. And I would like to tell all of you teachers and principals that we came with respect, we stayed with respect, and we are leaving with respect for you. Nothing but respect for you. So truly, I mean, you're doing, God bless you. I mean, आप हैं तो हम हैं, ये मान के चलिए आप, truly. So
Super.
please accept our gratitude.
100%.
Yeah.
Super. It was indeed a wonderful session. We have to be grateful to teachers and principals who have allowed the education system to encroach on their personal time, their personal space, the burnout that it has caused them. And despite all of it, day in and day out, relentlessly, they put in all the effort. Schools, are on a real physical shutdown mode. No schools are working because of the pandemic. And despite that, these teachers in no time, in really, literally no time, geared up to match and come up to this challenge and teach students, motivate them to learn, regardless of whether the exams are going to be held or not held. They have motivated children to do their best. And I think that really deserves a huge applause from all of us, from the media, from
Absolutely.
every one of us. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. And
Thank you very much,
for
everyone.
joining us. And Monica, would you like to add something here?
No, I was just thanking everyone. Yes, that's it. Thank you, everybody, for being a part of this wonderful session. And thank you, Sugandha, Anjum sir, and Aditi.
Thank you, Anjum sir. It was such a privilege listening to you.
I enjoyed it.
It was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sugandha. Thank you, Monica, for being such gracious
Yeah.
organizers and hosts, and for giving us a
Yes.
platform where
Special thank you to
more than sharing, we felt like, hamari koi sunega, and exactly what Anjum sir said, right? It's about feeling heard. That kind of lightens the load.
Thank you very much, Pavnendra ji, Kunal, and all of this, Amrutash ji, for making this session successful. Thank you once again, all the teachers and principals, for joining us here. So we would like to end the session now on that note, wishing all the very best to each one of you.